Good morning.
Good morning.
Please feel free to shift around in your seats so you can see a little bit better or sit more comfortably as you need. So I had the great pleasure of receiving some sunburn on the left side of my face this weekend. I hope that you've been managing to get outside a little bit. And the blossoms and the flowers. The cherry trees, the flowering cherries in the front here, I think they came into full bloom sometime early next week and are almost completely gone. Maybe just a few more days. But fortunately for us, in the back here we have a weeping cherry just right out this door here that's in full form right now. And if you want a real treat, you go back by the planting beds and the apple buds are just coming in. Just babies. This is the first time maybe I've ever looked at apple buds at this point, and some of them are a little bit like Siamese apple buds, conjoined twin apple buds. So I'm curious if those will turn into, I don't know, conjoined apple situation. We'll see. I'll let you know in a couple months, maybe a couple weeks when I have another talk, what happens. So this is the last talk in a 3-part series I'll give about the Lotus Sutra. I've been saying again and again, the Lotus Sutra is inviting us into the teachings of Buddhism through an imaginative display. The stories and parables, not explaining or trying to hand us some kind of metaphysical mapping of the situation. So a fantastic display that invites us to a discourse on an awakened life. And like the feathers of a peacock calling to a mate, and like the cherry blossoms inviting bees from miles and miles around. That's what it was like just last week. You'd go outside. And like the moon's natural pull on a human heart, no matter what wax or wane it happens to be. So like these colorful displays which call forth a response, this tradition has also been similarly ostentatious and provocative since its inception with the Buddha Shakyamuni 2,500 years ago, calling to our yearning hearts. The Buddha, when he was said to have attained awakening under the Bodhi tree, he said, "I, together with all beings and the great earth, at one time attained to the way." I, together with all beings. Dogen Zenji, founder of our lineage in Japan, he said, "The way is originally perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent on practice and realization?" Can you feel that faith from the very first step forward? And in fact, Dogen Zenji's words, that's how he opens his instructions for meditation practice. Totally perfect and all-pervading. The Dogen Zenji's great-great-uncle in the Dharma. Question, does anyone know who their great-great-uncle is? Well, it's a term you don't throw around that often. So his great-great-uncle in the Dharma said, "Not a single hair or grain of rice can impede your finally renewing and straightening yourself. Readily, you can now cast away everything. The circle integrates brightness, its spirit triumphs in wonder. Simply know that originally it is without defect, and not even a bit is excluded." Not even a bit. The Lotus Sutra does its part when it says that even if a child were to draw a picture of the Buddha in the sand, this would be sufficient cause for that being to attain awakening at some point. This radical faith, what a beautiful vision. And my life seems like it's full of shit.
Yeah.
Thanks, Genki. Being a human being is hard. And there are so many things I would rather do without. So many things that with their mere presencing, I don't believe that a joyous and beautiful life is possible. But here, right from the get-go, we're offered so much faith that we're endowed from the beginning with a great inheritance, that it is of our blood. And so the words used in Buddhism about the path of transformation are to realize, to wake up to. Oh, this life of anxious turning, the separation, wandering, and scheming that feels so central to how I tend to move in the world. Now it seems that other beings are doomed to move through the world, can appear like in a dream, like an illusion that we can wake up from. Further on in the Instructions for Zazen, Dogen Zenji says, "Why leave behind the seat in your own home to wander in vain through the dusty realms of other lands? If you make one misstep, you miss the seat that is directly in front of you." Directly in front of you. It's so close, it's so hard to find. So practice here at this temple and other Zen communities and Buddhist communities, probably faith traditions of all shapes and sizes, I think also partake of this faith. And in our tradition, Zazen is a prime example for this. You wander in, you're interested in meditation, and we say, great, let's sit down for a while. And essentially, we're saying, if you look behind me, take up the shape of Buddha. Go directly. And of course, you're offered some techniques and a little bit of guidance, but not very much. And instead, you're encouraged, realize the treasury that's already at hand, already underfoot. And so, also a little bit of explanation is needed. Some holding in this journey is important and necessary to endeavor in this journey. And the Lotus Sutra and all Buddhist teachings take care of this transformation. The Lotus Sutra, I would say in particular, is a great exposition of this realization. It's unfolding a homecoming to a deep freedom that's already present. So how do we discover it? How do we rely upon it? So I've been weaving a narrative over the past 2 weeks that one of the first movements that's necessary, that we're pointed to, is a two-pronged heart choreography. First, to not distract yourself from your suffering. That sounds pretty harsh when I put it like that. Of course, it's hard, and I'm finding endless ways to try and escape it. But we become unable to experience a kind of transformation that we're deeply looking for. That this very life and death, this very embodiment, is worth its while. In the last parable I shared last week about the prodigal son, that working and shoveling the dung can be worth double wages of the day, right? There's some mysterious possibility in staying with the difficulty. And secondly, and perhaps simultaneously, we must yearn to know something which we already do not know. Otherwise, we just continue enacting our habits and reactions, our anxious churning that we actually know doesn't quite work. In the first parable I offered about the burning house, the whole house is on fire. It all bursts into flame at once. And yet, we grow contented with finding a room we think will be safe, finding a small activity or game that will keep our concentration away from the burning house for just a moment, just a small time. So we must enact an open and curious heart and become conscious of a question. What am I missing? And so this two-part movement is accepting our difficulty and suffering, facing it and staying with it, and moving into a yearning heart, that this is what makes arrogance depart. The parable, not a parable, when the Buddha is about to begin teaching the assembly, is to ask 3 times, to beg, please teach us, please teach us. He says, no, you won't take care of it, it'll just confuse everyone. And after they ask enough times, the arrogant ones, 5,000 monks and nuns in the assembly of their own accord, stand and leave the assembly, and the Buddha doesn't stop them. So this is where we become open to receive the teachings. Lotus Sutra says, when beings wholeheartedly wish to behold the Buddha, not begrudging their own bodily life, then I and the assembled Sangha appear. So what do we receive? What do we become open to? The next step. Each moment, each layer of releasing our anxieties is different than another. Our realization of the freedom endowed in human life is always unique, specific, meeting us exactly where we are. This is the teaching of skillful means, central Buddhist concept, that the medicine of Buddhism, the Buddhist teachings, practices of a skillful teacher or friend in the way appears in response to our difficulties. So as the delusions of living beings are countless, so too the approaches and gates of awakening are also countless. An ancestor in our tradition, Sekito Kisen, says it like this, that thousands of words and myriad interpretations are only to free you from obstructions. This freedom from obstructions. This is the unfolding of the path. So the skillful means pervades our path of practice and transformation. We find it externally, and I think that makes sense to us. We have wise friends and teachers who can point things out to us, and they're helpful, they're kind, they lead us to the next step. And also, we're exhorted to take part in that, be helpful to the world, offer skillful guidance to others. And also, we find this internally, or we could say, not merely externally. And the place we study this most concretely in our tradition is, again, zazen or meditation practice. So we're all sitting here upright, and our hearts of practice are likely, they appear vastly different. And from day to day, I find that it's vastly different. And some days, my anxious mind and heart spinning so fast that all I can do is count my breaths to offer my being some sense of stability. 1, 1, 2, 2. Other days, my inner critic is slamming the world ruthlessly. And so my response ends up being something like, it's okay. It's okay. And it becomes a time to maybe cry, to just feel into an offering of softness and compassion. And sometimes we can move into a sense of appreciation for every sound, every breath, every phenomena, as though there were nothing else existing in the entire universe. This one practice, myriad shapes and sizes, changing all the time. So this is what we can explore in this practice of zazen. This skillful means that our heart can sense and learn to respond to itself, the myriad beings showing up right here as this embodiment. And also moving into skillful means as a way to imagine or encounter things in themselves, the shapes and counters of our very life. And this is the heart of the Zen admonition to just pay attention. Just drink your tea, wash your bowl, chop wood, carry water. Just do the things and look clearly. You'll figure it out. Teaching goes something like that. So that things in themselves are inviting us to a vibrancy that we are somehow just not paying attention to, not taking stock of the vibrant, unfolding self that's really here, moment by moment. And this mysterious guidance always around us, open for us to receive. And Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, he said, to follow your bliss, and the doors will open where there were only walls before. We find that, you often find that sometimes you have a chore or a task that you're just avoiding because it feels like some kind of monolith that is only the quality of bad or uncomfortable. And then surprise, you start doing the dishes and you're like, oh, I can have warm water. That's nice. Or sometimes it's like, oh, there's no warm water. Wow, right? All kinds of opportunities for waking up through our dulled sense of the world. we've been talking about science at the temple a little bit. I think it's been excited by, well, we saw the International Space Station the other night. So there's an app you can go on and look at it, and it'll tell you when from your specific location you might be able to see it. It's also fun. It rose over there, and there may be 8 or 10 of us. Is that it? Is that it? And at the same time, some other space junk thing happened. We're like, there it is. People were like, no, there's nothing there. Anyway, it was great. It was great fun. And it got me thinking about this mysterious guidance. And a couple of years ago, I read a biography of Albert Einstein, right? A very lovable character. And he revolutionized science in his lifetime. And at some point in scientific pursuit, I guess he was in the 40s or 50s, I don't have the dates right, people were figuring there were all sorts of problems appearing in the typical scientific thinking of the day that Newtonian physics wasn't being able to rise to the occasion of. So they were doing new experiments about electromagnetism, light, and optics, and everything just wasn't adding up. There was some great confusion, some elephant in the room that scientists were bonking into and running into again and again, unable to explain. And here he is, this sort of average student, super interested in physics, unable to get a full-time paying position as a physics teacher, teaching math and working in a patent's office, but totally in love with physics. And he makes an imaginative leap. And he comes up in 1 year, what they call his miracle year, with 4 papers, which totally changed science at the time. And the biggest thing he said was that energy equals the mass of an object times the speed of light squared. And he ends up being right. And he had it pinned down with a thought experiment. And he said, well, if you get telescopes and you look at this eclipse at a certain time, you'll be able to tell, da, 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 da. Everyone's like, that's wild. And some people believe it enough to go and test it out, and they find that it adds up. Energy equals the mass, the speed of light squared. Mass times the speed of light squared. So he makes an imaginative leap. He doesn't stay with the knowledge of the day, grinding again at those experiments. He takes a leap and changes everything for us. So I think this is a way we can imagine skillful means in our own life, the kind of lens that can point us to a radical view of what living could be about. That the deeply intertwined world that is so often the cause of my fear, my vulnerability and fragility, the concrete impermanence of this changing world, when perceived skillfully, this in itself may become the vibrancy of liberation. Can you feel that shift? Essentially, nothing changes, yet everything changes in that movement. And coursing in a perception of skillful means turns our heart from a place of protection and separation, self and other, gain and loss, into a posture of enduring novelty, flowing as the continuous changing world. Enduring novelty, flowing as the continuously changing world. It's possible to live that way. To touch and make communion with something that in fact is nourished and at peace only in that fragile world. And I would say that this is what we call in our tradition Buddha. Now can you imagine that a person living 2,500 years ago refined and cultivated their mind, listened deeply to the world, sharpened their faculties to such an extent that they woke up to and became identified with this enduring presence which knows itself only through transformation. An enduring peaceful vibrancy that appears concretely through a boundless aperture. I, together with all being, the great earth, attain to the way at one time. So this imagining should feel like a stretch. We can also think of someone who we deeply respect and who are inspired by. I think of Thich Nhat Hanh, a man who experienced such great difficulty during the Vietnam War, was exiled from his country. A Dalai Lama, not reaching too far for examples here, a Dalai Lama who's experiencing the present destruction of his culture and homeland. And somehow both of these men, more vibrant, joyful, and alive than I know how to be. So these beings, this Buddha here on the altar, they shake us up. They shake us in our clinging to our narrow turning and present images of the impossible. The Buddha owned almost nothing. 3 robes, a bowl, a water filter. People built a hut for him now and again. That's about it. Doesn't that sound miserable? And yet, utterly at peace, utterly without power, without control, shining brightly with deep presence and contentment. What magic. So the Buddha on the altar, placing the Buddha at the center of the altar of this room, the center of our life, imposes a question and a possibility that I too may center on this kind of vibrancy, fresh and renewed in each instant. And so then we start to ask, what is the concern of a Buddha? What are they doing? What are they taking care of? What are they attending to? The Lotus Sutra answers that when the Buddha is speaking to the assembly, he says, I ever make this my thought. How can I cause the living beings to enter into the Buddha way and promptly embody Buddha? The circle complete right there. The Buddha is simply returning to skillful means, always attending to what is brightly, presently in front. Next step, next step. So that may feel nice, and also might feel quite heady and abstract. The Lotus Sutra offers an image here of what the experience and activity of a Buddha could be like. This is not unlike a dream or a sci-fi story, trying to shake us from our narrow clinging into that, closer to an actual reality that's present. It was about midway through the sutra, and at this time, the assembly has been pretty much thoroughly convinced that skillful means are the way to go. Everyone's pretty on board. And here's what happens. At that time, the bodhisattvas, the great ones who had come from other lands and were more numerous than the sands of 8 Ganges. They'll use that term a lot, the sands of the Ganges. So, giant river, tons of tiny pieces of sands, 8 of them, more than that. At that time, the bodhisattvas, the great ones who had come from other lands and were more numerous than the sands of 8 Ganges, arose in the great assembly, with palms together, greeted and spoke to the Buddha, saying, World-honored one, if the Buddha will allow us diligently and devotedly to protect and embrace this sutra, read and recite it, copy it, and make offerings to it in this world after your extinction, we would teach it everywhere throughout this land. So they're convinced of a great vow. They want to take care of this skillful means. The Buddha said to the whole group of bodhisattva great ones, Enough, my good sons and daughters. There is no need for you to protect and embrace this sutra. Why? Because in my world itself, there are as many bodhisattva great ones as there are sands in 60,000 Ganges. And each one of these bodhisattvas has as many followers as there are in the sands of 60,000 Ganges. After my extinction, they will be able to protect and embrace, read and recite, and teach this sutra everywhere. When the Buddha had said this, the earth of this 3,000 great thousand-fold world trembled and split open, and from it, innumerable tens of millions of billions of bodhisattva great ones sprang up together. These bodhisattvas all had golden-hued bodies, the 32 characteristics of a Buddha, and immeasurable radiance. Previously, they had all been living in the world of empty space below this world, and when these bodhisattvas heard the sound of the voice of Shakyamuni Buddha preaching, they appeared from below. While these bodhisattva great ones who had sprung up from the earth praised the Buddhas with all kinds of bodhisattva praise, 50 small eons went by. And during this time, Shakyamuni Buddha sat in silence, and silent also for the 50 eons were the 4 groups of followers in the assembly. But the divine powers of the Buddha made it seem to the great multitude like only half a day. Wouldn't it be nice if a morning of retreat was like that? 50 small eons, just a morning. Beings are convinced of this skillful means, the vibrancy of the world. I will take care of it. I see this is an amazing path that takes stewarding. And the Buddha basically says, I'm good. No thanks. Maybe it's not that cold. But he reveals that there's something autonomous and alive and moving that doesn't actually need our care on one level. And that they exist within the space within the earth. The empty space within the earth. The space within the concrete. Great wide doors as the opaque walls themselves. The unfathomable vibrancy of ancient time, all unfolding within the span of a morning. Maybe it could be like this. Maybe it is like this. So from this point, I don't have much else to offer. I recognize this series hasn't offered many handholds to get a grip on things. The stories probably remain fairly mysterious and opaque. I'm not offering much practical advice or methods to operationalize what I'm saying here. And so I made an embarrassing display and asked you to imagine this and that probably far too many times. And yet, maybe without a handhold is the way it has to be. Something about not being able to grasp onto a technique, a practice, a simple narrative that we can view all the way to our supreme happiness. It's not the way it works. Instead, giving over to the opaque. That one of the main ways to talk about that story of the Buddha and the beings under the earth is that the Buddha cultivates those beings, has been training them and teaching them. We can also maybe think that maybe he's just presencing them, witnessing each thing emerging from what we call the ground, or what we recognize that could be the ground of our mind and our being. Every thought, every sound, it just corresponds perfectly. And he simply sees that. Nothing else added, nothing else extra. And so in drinking up this foolishness, I'd like to double down within this fragile imagination and ask you to come along one last time. If you would consider, if you could imagine, what if every minute movement of your body and your mind and your heart is totally precious and valuable? What if the concrete matter of your life, this birth and death, was itself great? that fearful blaze of instability can be known as an ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. What if time and body were not like the rolling billiard balls of Newtonian physics, but a constant energetic flow mysteriously constellated by mass and light? What if that which we call Buddha is itself your trembling heart, which turns to face its difficulty? Can you imagine? And what if you were always kept in mind? And what if there really was no gap? We have time for a few questions or comments.
Since this is the third talk, I know you've said this probably lots of different ways, but maybe some statement of exactly how the Lotus Sutra works for you. Does that make sense? That's a question.
You think that'd be a lowball question, like a nice low-hanging fruit that I could really jam on?
I'm not sure that's okay. I don't know.
No, there's no kind of judgment about it. So, honestly, it feels very mysterious to me. In one sense, I mentioned this last class, it's agonizing for me to read. That I catch myself when I open it. There's, I've paraphrased a lot of the stories and cut it off. You see me turn a page and read something, turn a page and read something else. That there's this intricate detail that feels extraneous, and I'm constantly just tell me what it is. Get to the punchline. And you can see in my copy here, there are parts that are just emphatically underlined because it feels like they throw me a bone. Yes, there it is. But in its, the Lotus Sutra itself says that it is a skillful means. It's teaching about skillful means, and it is a skillful means. And in fact, our whole being of life is like endless extraneousness in one sense. And it's because we call it extraneous and we don't know how to value what's really appearing before us that it appears extraneous. And so I find that the Lotus Sutra really takes my whole surrender and a real vision and perhaps the impetus of giving a few talks on it to really dive into and surrender to receiving what it has to offer. And so I would take a moment here to say that I do have plans in the next couple of weeks to make a small, I don't know what the right term would be, reading list within the Lotus Sutra. It's a pretty tall order to read the entire thing, but to offer simply 10 of the stories or so that are probably 90% of what's talked about in the Lotus Sutra. So you can jump in that way if you're interested in reading more of the Lotus Sutra.
I was ruminating on the word faith when you started talking. It's a word that still kind of makes me twitchy sometimes from the childhood of faith, meaning being told to believe in things that didn't feel true. And I always appreciate that that's not really how we use that word here. But I was just really listening to, from the Buddha and the Lotus Sutra to the Dogen, to other ancestors, to just the way we give instruction in Zazen, how much in this tradition, it's about the tradition having faith in us. And I just thought it was really good.
Yeah, indeed. Aren't we lucky? as struck what you're saying, that line, not sure which Shastra it's at the end of, maybe the verses of faith, mind, but faith and mind are not two. And then non-duality, so oneness, is faith in mind. This is what's being offered. We somehow have to deeply believe in what's appearing before us. And for me, maybe to turn this practically a little bit, where are the quiet voices that we constantly dismiss? Constantly lopping them off. Just saying, oh, small feeling that way. Yeah, can't be worth chasing down. We're not having faith in the beings emerging from the earth. It's so easy and so difficult, all in one. Thank you. Maybe time for one more.
Last week, I just talking about parables and prodigal son. And I'm also have a foot in the Catholic faith still, kind of thing. So I'm walking both those paths. But last Sunday happened to be at Mass. They read the prodigal son also there, kind of thing, and just hearing the whole parable thing, and just it's really opened my mind to wanting to spend more time with the Lotus Sutra, and just it's like Jesus taught was through parables. He didn't, the church has, you could say all sorts of things about how it's misrepresented his message through the years or whatever kind of thing. But when you go back to just the teaching of parables, that really has enlivened something in me where I want to. So I'm looking forward to hearing about your little. We'll wade into that water easily with your little synopsis, and then find how to skillfully get into the Lotus Sutra. But I appreciate the whole parable connection there. Resonates with me.
I was close to mentioning, I have a favorite line from the Catechism, which is the official doctrine of the Catholic Church. And it says that when God directly reveals themselves to you, they are still beyond your ability to comprehend. How wildly mystical is that statement? When God directly chooses to reveal themselves to you, they are still beyond your ability to comprehend. And there's such connection there in Buddhist practice. Yeah. That this revelation, on one hand, totally offered, and we'll never be able to scoop it up as an idea, to have it and use it remains unusable in many senses, but something we can actively rely upon. It means empty and bright, not unlike the mirror behind me, just in front of the Buddha.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.